in-person group is also on camera. If anybody else wants to join me on camera, just so I'm not talking to a bunch of names, I would love that, but totally no pressure. And this is being recorded. Excellent. So thank you, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get rolling. Just so you know, I do teach data analytics. Sometimes I give lectures. So if this feels more like a classroom because of the way I'm talking, that'll be why. So I'm going to start off with, I know I have Jupyter open right now, but I'm actually going to shut this down if I can remember how to under File. I'm going to go ahead and log out, and then I'll come back to that in a moment. So starting off, I'm going to be on the OceanHackWeek website. Just so you guys know where I'm getting all of my resources from, I'll put this link in the tutorials channel in case anybody wants to follow along with me. But if you are on OceanHackWeek 2023, you'll actually see right here on the front page, there's a note about technical preparations and background. So there's a note here saying to review the preparation materials covering basics like Git, GitHub, Conda, package management, and the Jupyter Hub. If we click that, it'll actually bring us into resources and then down into this preparation tab. So this is actually the material I'm going to walk through today. I didn't want to write any of my own material, and I kind of liked the way that this flowed. So I'm just going to be scrolling through this and we'll just do the steps together. And I figure that'll give us kind of a good introduction to Git if this is your first time using it. And this way too, then you know that you have access to the instructions after the tutorial. So if we click into Git, we can see here, there's all kinds of information about the basics and setting up. If anybody still needs to install Git, I did send a link out about 30 minutes ago with a link to installs. Otherwise, if you already have it, make sure you know which terminal you're using. I like using Git Bash, but I know that there's actually a new Git command line, or I don't know how new it is. I just know that it's new to me. I haven't used it before. So give that a try if you're interested. Maybe Felipe will demo it, or Alex, if you've used it, demo it later. So there are some notes here about installation. Felipe says Git Bash is great for Windows users. Thank you. Like I said, links are here in case you still need to install it. Linux, I have no experience with, so we'll be relying on each other's help for that one if anybody needs that. And then I also want you to have your GitHub username and email easily accessible. So hopefully everybody has their own personal GitHub account and you can access sort of your username, your email, and you know your password, because you will be asked for those kinds of things when we are pushing and pulling and things like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started in here. If anybody needs to run these commands, it's super easy. All I would do is I would jump in here, I'd open up Git Bash. Oh, there is also a GitHub desktop, like a GUI-based application that you can use as well. But if you want to learn how to navigate the command line version, that's what I'm doing today. So if you have not set up your local configuration with your username and email, you're just going to use these two exact lines. So it'd be git config -- global, and that's setting it for every repository on your system, as opposed to just one repository. And then you would do user.name and type in your username. So mine would be Derya Gumustel like this. But I think I've already done this. So if I run this command, I'm not sure anything will happen. I think usually if you're running this for the first time, you also don't get any response back. And then I'm going to give it my email as well. That way, if you guys ever need to email me, now you know how to. So if you have both of these set already, fantastic. You should be good to go now. There is also, there will be links throughout this page to the software carpentry lessons. If anybody doesn't know software carpentry, they have amazing tutorials and walkthroughs for all kinds of stuff. They actually do also have a Git lesson that I think Denise walked through for the Australia group yesterday, my time, last night, my time. So if that's another resource you're looking for, that would be a great one to check out as well. Cool. So scrolling through, I just want to highlight there are sort of two different workflows presented in this tutorial page. The first One is labeled here as a centralized workflow, and essentially it'll be where everybody's working directly on the same repository. So all of your teammates are going to be added as collaborators, and you all have edit access to the entire repository, that kind of thing. Whereas the second workflow demonstrated starting in step 6 is going to be where everybody sort of forks their own copy of your project repository. I've worked with both of these approaches. I've seen them worked in several different scenarios. So I think that we recommend the second one where everybody sort of forks and clones their own copy. But it's really up to you guys if you feel comfortable just adding each other as collaborators and giving everybody access to everything and just working in one sort of more centralized repo. Totally up to you. Cool. So before I actually jump into this, there was one comic I'm remembering that I wanted to show. I don't have it ready though. Give me one moment. Elevator music. You can tell how prepared I was for this. Thanks, Felipe. So this is, I think, the comic. I think everybody who has taught this lesson or seen us teach this lesson will recognize it. I think even the software carpentry group starts with this comic, which is just, let's talk about why we need version control in the first place, right? Everybody knows the situation where you're working on a file, you're working on a document, you're working on some code, you submit it, you think that you're done, then you get all these edits back and it's like, okay, let me make some revisions and then submit this new final copy. And you just start renaming it final revision 6 with comments, with corrections, with more, and then finally why am I even here? If you ever open up your folder system on your computer and you have a dozen copies of the same document that are just at different iterations, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Things like Google Docs will store your version history for you. If you've ever had to scroll through your version history and see oh man, I deleted this one paragraph, but now I really want it back. That's the same idea of what Git and GitHub are letting us do. So Git is just a version control system, and GitHub is sort of a server site that lets us host our own version controlled code. So I just wanted to make sure I got that in there. Kind of forgot, pulled it up at the last minute. But anyway, back to the tutorial, following along. I'm actually going to go ahead and with OceanHackWeek's permission, I'm going to create a little Git dummy project for us to clone and practice with. So if I jump into OceanHackWeek, the organization, you all throughout the week will hopefully start creating some project repositories for whichever project you want to work on. Only one person in the team needs to make a repository, and then everybody else should be able to access that. So we really only need one of each of them. And you'll notice here that we are following some naming conventions that are outlined on this page as well. And I think they've also been outlined in Slack. But the goal is just to have clear labeling. So here we've got OHW23_proj for project, and then underscore, and then some name relevant to the topic of your project. So here we've got SST for sea surface temperature. We have SA upwelling. We have marine SDMS. So hopefully this is what we're seeing. And if you click into one of these projects too, you can start to see what other folks are working on in case this helps you figure out what project you want to contribute to this week as well. I just wanted to highlight the SST project because they have a great README so far that has all kinds of nice headings. They have a link to their ideation board. They even have a Slack channel already. They have, of course, the link to this exact GitHub repo. They also have team members and some images. So this is great. If you're ever unsure of what you should be putting in your README, go ahead and look around and get inspiration from other folks. I think that's a great place to start. If you've never made a new repository before, go ahead and just watch. Not everybody needs to create a dummy repository for this exact moment, but I'm going to go ahead and just create a new repository, and this is what the page looks like. I'm not going to use any kind of template, but I am going to make sure that I'm in OceanHackWeek, and then I'm just going to name this one OHW23, and I'm going to call this Git dummy, and that just tells us that this is sort of a dummy repo for practice. And I can even put that in the description. So repo for Git practice, if I can type, Typing in front of people is nerve-wracking. And then I'm gonna make sure this is public so everyone can interact with it. And I'm also gonna add a README file. If you want to add a git ignore file, this can be really helpful. Although if you choose one of the templates that they offer, it will auto-populate your git ignore file with all kinds of packages and labels and things that might not actually be relevant to what you're doing. If you've never heard of a git ignore file, it's basically a plain text file that lets you tell GitHub or Git like which files to keep track of and which ones to totally ignore. So if you're working in Jupyter notebooks, you'll get those IPYNB checkpoint files. You can add those to your git ignore list so that those don't get sent to GitHub because they really aren't necessary. You can also put credential files in your git ignore file. You can put data sets in there, all kinds of things. So that's really helpful. I usually like to make my own from scratch instead of using a template though. And then you can also choose a license. This is one that I haven't done that much research on. So if anybody has any thoughts about licenses to choose, I know the MIT license is, I think, usually a safe bet, but I would love if anyone has thoughts to drop them in the tutorials channel on Slack. For now, I'm not going to choose anything. And then you can also see here that what I'm creating now will be set as the main default branch. So there might be some change in vocabulary. I know I was watching Felipe's tutorial from a couple of years ago, and they were in the process of hopefully renaming from master to main. That has finally been done. So if you see some instructions that reference a master branch as opposed to a main branch, just keep that in mind. If you try one and you get an error, just try the other, and that should help. Cool. And I'm just going to go ahead and create this repository. And then it should show up on everybody's page. This is what it will look like. So far, I just have a README file, and that is totally fine. So now if you're on the OceanHackWeek main page and you scroll down, now we have this. Oh, now we have two. Excellent. So someone was following along with me. This was unnecessary, but that's totally okay. We'll come through and clean it up later. For now, I'm just going to work from the plain Git dummy repository. And now we're actually going to start like doing our Git work. So if I go back to these instructions on our main page, we can see, okay, we created our repository, we added a README file. This is the point where we could start adding collaborators. So if I was going to do that, I would jump into the settings for my repository and scroll down to collaborators. It's like the first option there. And then it's going to ask for my password, and hopefully I know what it is. Thank God I do. That would be embarrassing. And now we can see here that I am the admin, but I can start adding all kinds of people. I could even add teams, but I don't know our team names, so I won't do that. So this is where you would go through, if you're working with everybody on one centralized repository, you would just grab the names of your folks. So I could add at least Felipe. I wonder if I have to type his actual name. No results. Oh, I think I have to add him from here. Perfect. And I'm going to give Felipe admin access. Cool. So now he can do all kinds of stuff. He can even delete the repository if he wanted to. And that is A-okay with me. I trust him to be a good collaborator here. From this point, what I would do is I would start to go into our actual Git workflow. Since we are following along, actually, Alex, should I be adding, do you have a thought about whether I should add, like, do we have a participant team I can add as collaborators here?
There are participant teams for Seattle Virtual and Australia, 3 separate teams.
Okay, maybe I'll do that. Perfect. Fantastic. So I'm going to give everyone who's participating right now read and write access. So you all should be able to push to this repository. And this is totally an experiment. So if it goes horribly wrong, I'm sorry in advance. And Australia, even though they're all probably sleeping. Fantastic. So now everybody should be able to make changes to this repository and have the right permissions. This might get chaotic. if we're following along with me now, let's scroll and see what the next step is. The next step is to actually clone the repository to your local computer. To do this, we just have to use a simple git clone. And if you aren't familiar with git clone, let me introduce you to the Git cheat sheet. This one I think is provided from GitHub's own tutorials. I always reference cheat sheets when I'm working with Git, and I'm going to drop this link into the Slack channel for you all. This just has all of the sort of main commands you'll probably need and a little description of what they do. So earlier, hopefully you've done this git config global user.name and user.email. You can see what that does. And then if we are looking into setup and initialization, we can see git init is how you would create a new repository on your computer, but git clone is how you're going to be adding a repository to your computer that already exists on GitHub. So here we're going to be grabbing that URL and cloning it onto our local computer, and that'll just give us like a local version of it. So let's go ahead and try that. If I jump back here, the way to access that URL is through this little code button. There are a few different ways to clone it. You can see the GitHub CLI even has its own tab. I'm going to use the regular HTTPS version. I'm not super familiar with SSH and all of that, so I usually get caught up in the instructions for it. So I'm just going to click this little copy button right here. You can see it copies it to my clipboard. You could also open it with GitHub Desktop if you like using GUI-based systems instead, or apparently you can also open it with Visual Studio. And then I'm going to navigate into my Git Bash window, and I'm going to start changing, let's see, current working directory. Oh, that's not a bash command. Ha ha ha. Okay, well, I think I'm on my desktop, so I'm just going to check really quickly. I'm going to navigate into my documents, and then from there, I've got a GitHub folder, so cd documents/GitHub. And now if I do an ls, you'll see, embarrassingly, how messy my GitHub folder is. So basically what I do is I put all of the repositories that I ever clone into one sort of main GitHub location, and that way I always know where they are. It can be helpful to have better file organization if you want all of your repositories for a particular job or for a particular project or something like that, all in their own folder. That can be a really good idea. You can see I also have actual notebooks out here, which is kind of messy. But now that I'm here, this is where I want to clone this repository, and it will get cloned as its own folder. So I don't have to worry about the files just being out there. It'll actually create a folder, and inside of that folder is where everything will go. I'm just going to type out git clone and then try and paste in that URL, but it probably won't work. Goodness. All right, help from the audience. Felipe, am I forgetting how to paste into git bash?
Maybe Shift Control V, Shift Control C. Like use the Shift as a modifier to copy and paste.
That doesn't seem to do anything.
And can you left click with the mouse and see if that works?
Aha. Oh.
Yeah, git bash is wrapping the line, so maybe you're fine. But
I think I'm probably fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Ooh, formatting. Okay, I'm gonna hit enter and see what happens. Oh no, it says this isn't supported. Okay, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, Git is changing and HTTPS is being dropped. So you probably need to clone that with SSH.
Okay.
And you probably need to have an SSH key set up.
Fantastic. So this will be exciting. Everyone gets to figure this out with me. If we swap over to SSH, it tells me right now that I don't have any public SSH keys in my GitHub account. Luckily, it gives me a link to add one. So I'm going to hop into here and see what this is. I am just going to.
It may be actually git bash inserts invisible characters if you paste into it.
Oh.
With the wrong way.
Okay. Should I try just typing it out manually?
I think so.
Cool. As inconvenient as that is, let's give it a shot because it'll be a lot quicker than me figuring out SSH keys in front of everybody. So I'm just typing git clone HTTPS with all of these little punctuation, and then OceanHackWeek /OHW23_git_dummy. That should be the full URL. The way these URLs is created is just github.com and then the owner of that repository. So in this case, it's actually OceanHackWeek, not me. And then the name of the repository. And then it looks like it had a little .git on the end. Oh, that does work. How funny. Cool. So back on track. As you can see, this was cloning, received a few things. And now if I open up my file browser, we can see if I scroll down to OHW23, I actually have a Git dummy folder and it's got that README in it. Hopefully that worked for everybody. If anyone's getting any additional errors, Valentina, I see you asking if I can make the terminal bigger. I can definitely zoom in on that one. And Alex, I see that we have the GitHub CLI installed. I'll try walking through. I think I'll have time to visit the Jupyter Hub for everyone to see what that looks like too. Cool. Back to the steps. So here we can start actually making changes. This is where it'll get really chaotic if we're all pushing to the same repository at once. But essentially the goal here is to make some changes to your README file. So I'm just going to double click open it. I'm not going to edit it from my terminal because that's a little more advanced than what I want to do right now. I'm just going to open up. Apparently Atom is set to my default. I like Visual Studio Code more. But from here, you can see I just have my plain Markdown file. So I'm going to start making some edits. These are some edits by Derya. And I'm just going to save it like that. Here you might actually, if this is actually for your project, you might be putting in information about your goals and your steps and your resources and your team members and all kinds of things like that. And then once I have those changes, make sure you save it. Otherwise, you'll see if I make a change, you'll see this little dot up here. Just make sure you save that before you try pushing anything. So now that I have my changes, I can jump back into my terminal. And we can start following the rest of the workflow. So I'm going to, first of all, change directories into my new folder. So I'll say cd OHW23, and then I'm going to hit tab because that should be the only folder I have. And then you can see right here, it tells me I'm in my main branch. Now, if I go ahead and run git status, it should show me in bright red or a different color if you have a different theme that I have modified my README file and I have not committed it. It tells me I could use git add or git commit -a to make those changes staged. So let's go ahead and do that. And those instructions are written right here as well. These are sort of the three main ones that you're going to be using in your task to push changes online. So you're always going to add files. You can add files individually, or you can use a period to add everything. You can also do a git commit. This is really important. And you want to add this -m flag, and I can zoom in a little bit more here. That will just let you add a commit message to tell everybody else looking at your code what changes you made. And then the last step will be git push origin. Sometimes this might be git push origin main, like it is down here. So let's go ahead and try it. I'll do git add readme.md. And now if I run git status again, it'll turn green here. So it's telling me that this has been, it's added and ready to commit. So you could add multiple files one by one like this, or if you wanted to add everything at once, you do git add period, and it would just add all of your change files to a single commit. And now we'll do the next step, git commit -m. And then here we can use quotes to put in a little message. So I'll just say, added my name and edits. And if I hit enter now, you can see, great, it's recognizing this as a commit. And this is my commit message. It tells me how many files I changed, things like that. And now if I do git status one more time, now it actually tells me that my current branch, my local branch, is ahead of the origin main branch, and I can use git push to publish local commits. It also tells me my working tree is clean, which is really nice to know. So I'm going to go ahead and do git push origin here. And it'll give me a little message. Depending on how much you're pushing, this might take a few seconds, but hopefully it all works. And now if I run back to our actual GitHub page and refresh it, you can see my edits have been updated. Now, READMEs are also editable on the actual GitHub page. So if you see there's a little pen mark here, if you click that, you can go straight into edit mode and I can start removing these. So I'm going to remove the edits that I just made and start adding some more interesting things. So like we need a workflow description, we need team members, we need resources, we need data sets, all these kinds of things. You can always preview your README files here, which is great to see how your formatting looks. And now if I commit these changes, it'll ask me for a commit message. I'm just going to leave it as update README. And then it'll also ask me if I want to commit directly to the main branch or create my own branch. I'm going to leave it as the main branch for now. Great. So if I go back here to the main page, that README has been updated once more. And, oh, that's not what I wanted to open. And if I need to pull these changes down to my local computer, because now I have a different copy, that'll be the next step. It'll be this git pull origin main. So I'm just going to run that. And I'll show you what origin is in a second, but essentially what this is doing is it's checking what I have on my computer. It's checking what's stored remotely on GitHub, and it's going to pull down any changes that have been made and overwrite my files, hopefully with what's there. I see an error message. Yeah, support for password authentication was removed. So let's see. Felipe, are you on that one? Paula, I recommend following the link that it gives you and seeing what the instructions say. It should be easy to follow along with, hopefully. But I remember folks having this error last year as well. So maybe we'll update our tutorial. I kind of wanted to run through what we had on the website just to see how up to date it is and whether we needed to make any changes as well. If this has been working for you so far, I do also want to show you, there's a note here saying that origin is just a short name of the web address for the repository. And if you actually want to see what you have stored there, you can do git remote-v, V stands for verbose. And this is just going to tell you exactly what URL you are pushing and pulling to using that origin nickname. You can always add like upstreams and downstreams and things like that. So there's some customization to be done here, but if you ever forget, then git remote v is a great tip. So this is sort of like the introduction to the full workflow of working on computer A and pushing stuff to GitHub, and then whoever's working on computer B, or even you, like if you have two computers, I certainly do. So I use GitHub like to pass files to and from myself even. This is sort of the idea is you push, pull back and forth. And it's really, really important to make sure that you're pushing like small changes more often rather than waiting until you have one huge update and then pushing everything at once. It's always good, like every hour, if you make some significant changes, make sure to post those. And that way, everybody that you're working with has those updates pretty constantly. There is a note here about resolving merge conflicts. So I'm not going to walk through this, but we can at least talk about it. If you and one of your teammates ever edits exactly the same line in the same file at the same time, and then you both try and push your changes to GitHub, GitHub's not going to know which changes you want, right? So this happens if I am, let's say Felipe and I both pull from our project at the same time. So we have at the start of the day, the same new copy. If we're both making changes and we aren't sharing those changes with each other, then at the end of the day, we might have totally different files from each other, and GitHub won't know which version of one file we want to keep. And that's what we call merge conflicts. So there are some additional details here about how to resolve those. Typically, you can open them up either in your terminal or in potentially in the GitHub desktop, although I'm not sure that it's sophisticated enough for that. I think you can address some merge conflicts directly on GitHub, or certainly in your text editor like Visual Studio or Atom or anything like that. And essentially all you have to do is figure out like whether you want this text or this text, tell it which one to keep, and then push that back to your repository. Like it says here, pull often and push small changes to avoid this happening. Felipe says VS Code handles conflicts quite well. Excellent. So that was sort of like the first workflow, like I said, working in that centralized repository, where in theory, we're all working from one repo together as collaborators. If you also want to avoid merge conflicts from this workflow, instead of all working on the same files at the same time, you can make sure that everybody's working on different files at the same time. Or if you are able to like pair code or something like that, then all the changes can be made just on one computer by one person, even if you're all collaborating on them. And then that person is the only one who pushes to your repository. Alternatively, another great workflow, instead of doing that centralized workflow, is to do this forking workflow. And this will be where we start creating forks and branches and start making it maybe a little bit more complicated, but hopefully better in the long run. So there are notes here. This is the workflow that we've been recommending, I think, since 2020 or 2021, something like that. And essentially, instead of having everybody contribute to one repository here, this little silo, we actually have everybody make copies of the repository that they can work on independently. So let's go ahead and do that. Everyone who's following along, if we hop into our Git dummy repository, if you are at the top of the page, you'll see along here, there are a few different buttons. One of them says fork. And if you go ahead and click this button, I'm going to click this, and I highly recommend you follow along with me. This will offer to create a new fork, which is essentially just going to be your own personal copy of the repository. This is great because this lets you pick up somebody else's work from where they've left it off and then make it your own. So I see this a lot if you are familiar with GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages lets you like host your own personal website that you create and store on GitHub. And a lot of people will share templates that you can then fork and start editing yourself. Another point of this is exactly what we're going to do here. So you create your own individual fork, you make edits there so that not everybody else is going to be affected by them. And then when you're ready to merge it back to everybody else's copy, you can create what we call a pull request, and hopefully we'll have time to get to that. So go ahead and just fork this repository. I'm just going to copy the main branch only, but if you had several branches, you could copy all of them. And then it says here, I'm creating a fork in my personal account. So now if I go ahead and do that, you'll see I have a loading bar, take a sip of coffee. Excellent. And then we have OHW23 Git dummy forked from the actual OceanHackWeek page. Jade is confused. What's the difference between fork and clone if they can both push and pull? Excellent. The difference is where you are pushing and pulling to. So if I don't want to mix up my contributions with my collaborators, then I would fork and push and pull, or rather push to my own local copy, but I could still pull from the shared copy, like the original copy that I forked from, and I could get everybody else's changes there into my own local copy. Felipe is writing out some explanation as well. Perfect. Cool. So now I have this. You can see it's actually in my personal page instead of on OceanHackWeek. If you wanted to, you could follow the same steps we did before. So now I would go ahead and clone this, start making some changes. And as I make changes, we can contribute back to the original project. So let's just go back to these steps. If I check out these steps, it says to sync your local repo with the public one. We did that by pushing and pulling. And now we're forking it. So we did that. And now you'll see the change in the URL. So now we want to update our origin in our local repository. To do this, it's a two-step process. First, we want to remove the original origin, and then I'm going to add in my new one. But then we can also take our old origin and turn that into what we call an upstream. So that way we have two different locations to push and pull from. We can push to our own forked version, but we can pull from the upstream, which will have other people's edits made. There is, I think, a diagram here Jade, this might help with the confusion as well, or anybody else who's a little bit lost about the process. It just turns our process, instead of being a direct back and forth, now we've got a little bit of a triangle. And this just allows for a little bit more control over what changes you're making, and ensuring like you're not maybe stepping on other people's toes as much. So it sort of slows down that direct back and forth. And you can see, just to explain the actual diagram, we've got our main repo. So this would be the one that is on OceanHackWeek's page. And then the local repo is the one on your computer that I have cloned locally. And then the personal fork is the one that I just made that's now stored on my GitHub page. And we'll go in this direction. So let's scroll back up. I'm just going to keep following along with the instructions. If I jump back into my terminal, the last command I did was that git remote v. So here we can see my origin URL, and that's the OceanHackWeek one. I want to go ahead and remove that. So I'm going to do git remote rm origin. That rm is for remove. And now if I do git remote -v, I've got nothing. So now I'm not connected to an online repository at all. I am just working locally. Now I'll go ahead and do git remote add origin. And I'm going to see if I can copy paste or if I have to type it all out again. No, I'll type it all out just to make sure. So I'm doing https://github.com and then /my username and then ohw23. Oh yeah, it did insert some characters. That's funny. Uh-oh. Let's just hit enter and see what happens. All right, one more time with feeling. Git add origin. /d Gumustel ohw23 git _ dummy. It should be .git at the end. Did I need to say git remote add? Yeah, I did. Live coding is the best. Oh. Oh, well, that's my problem. Sorry, everybody. I messed up by hitting enter on a bad command. Do as I say, not as I do. So I'm going to do that git remote remove origin line again. And then I will rerun. And in case you're really new to terminal, please make sure you're using your up and down arrow keys to like navigate to previous commands, because it saves you so much typing and so much heartache. All right, so now I've successfully added my full URL. And if I do git remote -v one more time, you can see that I've changed my origin from the OceanHackWeek version to my own personal copy. But there's one more step, right? In this diagram, we have two online repos. We have my personal one, which I just added as the origin. And then we've got this upstream one, which is the actual OceanHackWeek one. So if we go back up, we can see there's a step here that says to do git remote add upstream, and then we'll add back in that OceanHackWeek copy. I know this seems like a lot of steps. Luckily, you really only have to do it once, and then you can kind of keep working with what you have for as long as you're working on that particular project. Git remote add upstream, and then I just typed out hopefully the whole URL properly. And now if I do git remote -v one more time, you can see we have two options now. We have an origin and we have an upstream. So this lets you just control whether you want to push and pull from your origin or whether you want to push and pull from your upstream. Now you have access to both of those so you can follow that full workflow. Here it says from now on, you will push to origin, but pull from upstream. So let's honestly give it a try and see what happens. It looks like the command line tool streamlines this process. And similarly, GitHub Desktop, the application, also makes it really easy to change whether you want to push and pull from your origin or whether you want to set an upstream whenever you're cloning from a repository that's been forked. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and make some changes to my README file. If I navigate back into here and open this up one more time. You can see I have those changes that I made on the website directly. So now I can do a workflow description. I'll just say, this was all just for practice, team members, me, myself, and I, also Felipe and Alex helped. Resources from OHW 23, data sets, none needed because we are so cool. Now I'm going to go ahead and save these changes. Feel free to make whatever changes you want on your own copy. I'm going to minimize that and see what the next steps are. I made some new changes. So I always like to do git status just to really double check everything, make sure I know what's going on. It doesn't really seem like a necessary command when you're just changing one file and uploading it a second later. But if you've been working for an hour on like 5 different files, this really helps. I'll go ahead and do git add readme.md again. And I'm just following along with the instructions here on my page. Git status one more time tells me that that is ready to be committed. So I'll do git commit -m. And let's see, filled out info in README. Trying to be nice and detailed and set an example here. So it says I changed one file, I made 5 insertions, 1 deletion. That's just how many lines I added or deleted. And now here's the key. I'm going to do git push origin main. What this will do once it goes through is if I go back to github.com and I refresh my repository, I'm on my own personal profile, right? My own personal fork of this repository, and I have all of that information that I just added. But if I go back to the OceanHackWeek copy that I forked from, none of those changes have been added. From here, though, you'll see a little message pop up saying this branch is 1 commit ahead of OceanHackWeek main. Now I can think about contributing. So now I can open up a pull request and ask one of my team members to review my information. I'm just going to add that I want to combine my README with yours. And I'll just create a pull request just like that. This will automatically tell you whether or not you have some conflicts with your base branch. So if there are conflicting changes that you need to choose, that you want version A versus version B, this will give you a chance to sort of review that and address those before merging everything in. But once you're happy with it, then you can go ahead and actually merge it. You can also assign people to it in case you really do want other people to check out your work. So there's a reviewers section, and you can just go ahead and add someone. I can add Alex because he's the first one to show up on my list there. And now Alex can come through and give me his opinion on whether or not we're ready for this merge, or if we need to do any more debugging or better formatting or anything like that. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the green button just so you guys can see what happens. It says merge pull request number 2. I'll hit confirm. And now it'll say pull request closed, and it'll get this nice purple merged message. And now, oh, thank you, Alex. I got approval from my teammate. So now if I go back to our code, you can see all those changes that I added to my own personal fork are now on the main repository. Again, I know this is kind of silly because we're just like going in circles with this README file, which isn't really that big of a deal. You can literally just edit it right here. But once you start working with actual code files, it gets a lot easier to track all of your changes and make sure that you're not accidentally sort of confusing each other or adding code without anybody else realizing what you're adding, things like that. It gets a lot more helpful once you have like multiple files floating around and multiple people working on it at all hours of the day. Because that's one of the things about OceanHackWeek is your projects are kind of being worked on like 24 hours a day. If you're paired like on a project with somebody who's in Australia, then they're waking up when you're going to bed if you're in like the US. Or especially if you're in Europe as well. So there's just going to be a lot of changes happening all the time. Always make sure that when you're getting started, you're like checking in with your teammates on Slack about any changes that they made while you were gone, and make sure that you're pulling down a new copy of your repository. I think that was all of the instructions on this page. We accomplished that. There's a little bit about troubleshooting. Reverting to previous commits is really helpful in case you add something and then you want to take it back. I see Michael just asked, how do we revert a file? This is, again, maybe a little bit beyond the just the total introduction scope here, but I highly recommend checking out some resources. Usually, like I said, there's this, there are a ton of great cheat sheets out there, and anytime you need to sort of do something new, I recommend just looking it up and seeing what workflows other people suggest, because I certainly haven't memorized all of it. All right. The only other thing I wanted us to look at really quickly, if we have time, is the Jupyter Hub. I know that'll be a lot of people's first time getting to it. So from the resources page on our OceanHackWeek website, if you navigate down to Jupyter Hub, there should be a link somewhere on here. Alex, where's the nearest link to our hub? Never mind, it's right here. Ha ha ha. So I'm going to click on this link, and this will bring me to and Alex just put the link in Slack for anybody who hasn't seen this before. Highly recommend trying to log in if you haven't already. This will just ask for hopefully your GitHub login information. It already has mine saved, so I just have to click login, and it goes ahead and does that for me. And it pulls up whatever I was working on last year for our Python data viz tutorial. Hopefully you'll see that there's a Git button that has been added to the left-hand toolbar, and I'm not sure, oh, I can make this bigger, excellent. So this little Git icon right under the colorful Dask one, I always want to click that one because it's rainbow, but we actually want to go to the Git one. This will look at wherever you are in your file directory and tell you whether you're in a repository already or not. If you are not in one, it'll give you a chance to clone a repository. So following like exactly the same workflow as before, if I grab this Git dummy clone URL under that code button, and then I jump back into here, I can clone this repository by just pasting in that URL, clone, and now I have access to OHW23 Git dummy. I can open up that README. I can make changes here. One last edit. Let's just see what this looks like. I haven't actually done this before. This is my first year using Git inside of Jupyter Lab, so I'm excited, or Jupyter Hub rather. So I added one more edit down here. If I go back to our little Git button, now it should show up with notes about what I've changed, what's tracked or untracked. You can see this is a checkpoint file. We might add that to a Git ignored file, or I guess it actually already is because it's under untracked, which is kind of nice. And then I can start thinking about commit message if I zoom out a tiny bit. Added one more edit to README. And I think I just need to stage that one. So if you right click a changed file, you can stage or unstage it. You can also open it or check the difference or the history. This is great. Then you add that commit message, go ahead and click commit, and then it will ask you who's committing. Excellent, this is exciting. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. It looks like it committed my changes. So if I go back here one more time and refresh, I don't see any changes. Well, maybe I don't understand exactly how it works. Andrea, I see your question about, do you start pull requests on the command line, or is it typically mainly done on the GitHub site? It's usually mainly done on GitHub. I think you can start them in, oh, thank you, Miranda. I do need to push. So I committed these changes down here, but pushing is sort of that last step. If you see these little cloud icons with down and up arrows, this will be your pull button and your push button. So once you've committed things, you can go ahead and push, and then it'll ask me for my credentials. I will tell it you can save my login, and it failed to push because support for password authentication was removed. So now I get to follow those steps that we saw earlier, someone having trouble with in the Slack channel. So I'll be debugging this on my back end while everybody else is doing project work later, and hopefully this is pretty straightforward.
We've added the GitHub command line helper, which can help set up off here. If you open a terminal, gh auth login will walk you through that workflow.
If anybody doesn't know how to access the terminal from Jupyter Hub, I know some people haven't used Jupyter before, but it's under File, and then you can go to New, and then you can add all kinds of stuff. So Alex, you're telling me to open a terminal, and then what do I do? GH auth login, just like this?
Yes.
Wow. This is so cool. Yeah, I'll log in with the web browser. Let's see. First, copy your one-time code. Failed.
I don't think you can open a browser from Jupyter Hub because it needs an X server and we don't have one there.
Got it.
Oh, it worked.
I just clicked on the link it gave me.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. And then you can just give it access to everything. Beautiful. So now I'm logged in. So now if I try pushing, successfully pushed, refresh one more time, and I got that last edit in just before the bell. Perfect. So I hope I didn't lose too many of you. I know there was a lot of like troubleshooting randomly and random errors and things like that. Honestly, that's how every Git tutorial I've ever seen goes. And like I said, it's easier to learn the second or third or fourth time. Rely on cheat sheets and rely on us, your helpers. If you have your project team starting to form, ask around and see if there's anybody who feels really comfortable with Git or has experience with it, and rely on them. Like ask them like, okay, I've made some changes. Like how, like, can you make sure that I'm pushing correctly or that I'm committing everything to the right place and things like that. If you don't have anybody who's really Git comfortable in your team, please let us know. Like that is what we are here for. We want to make sure we're sort of getting around and helping everybody out. I do hope to see a lot more project repositories added here. I will go through and probably be deleting these Git dummy tutorials or repos later. Other than that, we are starting with the main session in a few minutes. So I'm going to stop my share. And this might be a good time if anybody needs a short break to grab coffee or water before we get rolling. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to drop them in the tutorials channel. And thank you all for your patience today. Much appreciated. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here if that's okay.